Great. Welcome everyone to day two of this year's LibreFest. This is going to be sort of new for me in that I have not given long form discussions behind both the Jupyter system and the Forge, but I'm very excited in order to be able to do so. So please bear with me a little bit. And we also have a bit of time, so we're altering our schedule slightly for the next hour and a half. Still focusing on the Forge and Jupiter, uh, but Carl Greco is going to be able to come in and provide a case study of what he's been doing with Jupiter in Arkansas. And I felt it was nice in order to have something more native than having me talk about the features and what aspects that you have going on here. So uh, I unfortunately have lost viewing everybody. Um, so I'm hoping that if you have any questions, feel free to give it into the chat, and hopefully I'll be able to address it. Some of the discussion I'm going to be saying will be actually true discussions instead of just me giving a topic overview here. So I'm very happy in order to introduce the Forge. And the Forge is a little peculiar in order to talk about for a variety of purposes. The primary reason for it is it's not really something that exists in other technologies that you can basically point to and say it is like this, and therefore you're able to work off of it. It's more unique technology, but yet it handles a very important niche that I think we have both in the open field and also in our educational field. Um, and such. So with that, let's get this thing going. So as a reminder, the LibreText project is multifaceted, and we focus on a variety of different efforts, largely classified into four primary thrusts. And that includes content development and content distribution. Those are where our libraries that host the OER that we then distribute. Technology development and technology implementation. While we're not an open source technology company, everything that we create is openly sourced, and you can find it on GitHub and you can grab and run with it if you decide that you want to go about doing so. Then we do general development efforts, partnering with projects in order to be partners with people in order to be able to advance the organizational goals, and then professional development and training, of which Academy and Academy Online is the critical component for that, which Justin has mentioned a few times, and we're using in terms of cataloging all the talks and organizations and such that you guys have seen already. What we'll be talking about now initially is focusing on the technology thrust and the expansion of the LibreVerse as the realization of this ecosystem that we're trying to build in order to distribute and distribute OER broadly. So what is the Forge? And I have this text out here, and this text may not mean much to you, at least right now. And the goal that I have by the end of this discussion is that it does mean something. So let me just mention it here. The Forge is a platform for the systematization of long-form projects within a peer-reviewable infrastructure empowered with advanced analytics. Um, and I want to mention a few things associated with this thing. The first thing is the word that probably doesn't mean much to you, which is asymatizing. And it probably doesn't mean much to you because it's a word that I came up with in order to be able to explain what it is that we were doing. And the gist behind that is to be able to take a project and be able to facilitate it into the classroom such that every student can actually participate in that sort of project. Um, the example that will come up a little bit in terms of what I'm going to be discussing, and certainly what Raymond Ornbrung is going to be talking about.
Delmar,
Uh,
I
uh,
think you might be sharing the wrong screen.
am I not? Am I sharing? I apologize for that. Is that now sharing the right screen?
Yes.
Okay. Uh, well, that was beautiful. So that would explain why I couldn't see people on that side there. So that being said, at least you can see I have a pretty picture to start the presentation. So again, to reiterate, it's a platform for isomatizing long-form projects within a peer review infrastructure empowered by advanced analytics. So in the topic of long-form discussions or long-form projects, that can mean a variety of different purposes depending upon how you actually teach. What I'm going to refer to as long form is something that is not easily digestible that I cannot use, for example, the adapt homework system in order to address. So if you want someone to be able to do some calculation relatively quickly, adapt is well suited in order to be able to address that, as most, if not all of you, learned yesterday. If you want to write a little mini paragraph, you can use the open grading infrastructure of Adapt in order to be able to facilitate that. But it's not designed for long form projects like I want to write an essay or I want to write a lab report or I want to formulate some presentation or make a spreadsheet on something or something that requires a bit of effort over an extended period of time in order to address. And the Forge provides an opportunity in order to take that long form infrastructure uh, or long form project that you want each student to be able to address and facilitate so they can individually create these projects, submit those projects, and then go through an infrastructure in order to facilitate review of that project, whether that review of that project is by the instructor as a subject matter expert or within an infrastructure of peer reviewing so that the students can actually interact with each other and learn from each other in order to move forward. Coupled, and this is really quite important and impressive within this infrastructure, advanced analytics in order to be able to identify how students are building that long form project. And this is exceedingly important in today's world when we have to figure out some way of coexisting with AI. And for those of us that are actually very concerned about how AI is going to be affecting our long form projects, for example, if you are teaching English composition, you're particularly apprehensive of what the future is actually going to be holding. And this provides a mechanism in order to help coexist within that infrastructure. Um, so again, the goal of my discussion here is to try to flesh out what this actual description is into something that's meaningful to you. So, so where can you find the Forge? If you go to the Launchpad, again, where you have access to the libraries and to the technologies of LibreVerse, and you'll find it right here in the middle. This is an older picture here. Now we have the Academy that's on the far left-hand side, at least as of yesterday afternoon. But nonetheless, you can click on this thing and open up the Forge in order to be able to see it. And we'll go through that depending upon how the time looks. Um, so in talking about the Forge, I should mention that we did actually not create the Forge. It was created by Raymond Ornbring, who's going to be talking in an hour and a half on his applications of the technology into his classes at the University of Bahamas. And it was formulated to focus on English composition and English writing. We've expanded the scope quite greatly, but most of our classes have some form of long form writing that's involved in it. So that means that this is actually a technology that can be applied to a variety of different fields, not just in English composition. For example, I use it in my general chemistry classes for writing of lab reports, which is equally long form, different scope than English composition or essay generation, but it has the same infrastructure uh, or the same needs at least. Um, so, um, just as a quick overview here, the Forge, when it was initially started by Raymond, was called Antecedent Writing. We rebranded it recently in order to address the broader scope of what we're doing. It's been around for several years. It's been used in at least 10 different campuses as Antecedent Writing. And again, its utility is across multiple fields, including composition, chemistry, writing of any course, whether it's history or other social sciences. And we can actually extend the utility of the infrastructure into new technologies like computer science, where instead of writing of prose, you're writing of code. And you can have the same sort of infrastructure that's out there in principle. Um, So in talking about what the Forge is capable of doing, I like to actually formulate it not just within its utility in the classroom as an instructor, but what it actually provides to the open community. In that case there, it's useful in order to emphasize what is the conventional way in which we construct OER resources. And invariably what that means is one or multiple people form a team. The team works together. They hone, carefully crafting their OER over a period of time, and then after appropriate review, typesetting, processing, it becomes published in the sense that it's now publicly consumable and you're able to find it. And that could be a time-consuming process for those of us that have actually gone through that process, understand it, but it's not hard in order to visualize it. It takes a bit of effort in order to be able to formulate that. Because of that reason, and because we want to be able to generate OER that's at the level of being able to address a broad scope of different topics, there are oftentimes classes that just don't have OER out there. In other words, OER has a general problem associated with quantity and quality. And what I want to be able to address is how Forge can actually be focused on being able to address both of these things. So that's the conventional way in order to go about doing these things. For those of us that have been in the community for a while, you may have heard of a wide range of different opens. You have open pedagogy, you have open educational resources, open science, open justice, lots of opens that are out there. And what I haven't discussed, or what hasn't been discussed in this meeting so far, is open pedagogy. And the idea behind open pedagogy is to use our students in order to be able to create resources or to create openly licensed resources. And that can be very useful, although trying, depending upon how you actually implement it, in terms of building lots of content relatively quickly. In fact, the LibreText project is the successor project to the ChemWiki. Now, the ChemWiki was started in 2008 as an open pedagogy project where we were teaching very large classes at UC Davis, 500 student classes. I offered extra credit for students in order to be able to help build modules, build pages in books. Getting a 20% buy-in or a 10% buy-in comes up between 50 to 100 students that are all willing and active in order to be able to build these things. Now, you need to have an effective system in order to facilitate that at large scale, and something like that doesn't exist. So most, if not all, of the open pedagogy projects that you'll hear about in presentations focuses on the benefits of open pedagogy. And I would love to be able to talk about that both pedagogically and from a practical perspective out there, but that's not the scope of this discussion here. The issue is, from my perspective, is how to implement open pedagogy in the classroom. What type of hardware, software in this case actually, is necessary to be constructed in order to be able to make open pedagogy as painless as possible to implement so that as broad of a range of people can actually use it in their classroom. And again, the idea behind open pedagogy is to have students construct content that are openly licensed, that are then non-renewable, so non-disposable, such that you can build upon it and move forward. And this is a great mechanism in order to be able to actually, I have animations here in order to be able to address these holes that we have in the OER landscape, especially for upper divisional classes, where the students are a bit better prepared in terms of constructing things than they are when they're in lower divisional classes. So in that case there, we want to be able to build this infrastructure that scales up large, scales up construction of OER. And we can do that with the Forge in addition to complementing the pedagogical needs that we have for generating long form. So the Forge's infrastructure right now relies on the technology from LibreOffice. LibreOffice is not associated with LibreText outside of this infrastructure, despite the sharing of the name. And LibreOffice, as you're unfamiliar with it, is an analog to Microsoft Office. At least with certain capabilities that you have access to. It's actually really quite a powerful system. It's an open source technology in contrast to Word or Google Docs, and you can actually install it on your computer right now, and it works actually quite well. Um, a, a company in Europe, Collabora, has actually has been working on taking the LibreOffice and migrating it to the web uh, to make it operate in a JavaScript-based environment, basically to make it look and operate like Google Docs. But not just Google Docs, but Google Docs, Google Sheet, Google PowerPoint, Google Slides, and provide that feature online within an open source alternative to Google Docs, which is closed. It also provides an opportunity in order to extricate people who want to use these technologies from Google for a variety of reasons. Privacy is one of the primary aspects behind here. And this technology is exceedingly powerful because if you want to do long form writing, you're not just going to be wanting to write just a little bit text. You want to have the full blown capabilities that a word processor provides or that a spreadsheet provides off of there. So that to that end, Collabora has four primary technologies that we have access to. They what they call Writer, which is basically a word processor, Calc, which is a spreadsheet, Impress, which is their presentation infrastructure like PowerPoint, and Draw, which is a vector graphics infrastructure. It's something similar to Inkscape. But and such. Each of these technologies are useful for different long form projects that you want to be able to do, as most of, if not all of us, are familiar with and using analogs from Microsoft or from Google. For example, if you want to write essays, reports, lit reviews, peer pedagogy, or other things, the document or the writer is a great technology for doing that. If you're doing statistics, accounting, data analysis, data entry, the spreadsheet capabilities in Calc is useful. The Impress infrastructure provides the opportunity in order to build presentations, infographics, portfolios, useful for many communication-based classes. And then the drawing capabilities in a Draw helps to facilitate construction of images, flowcharts, web design, shared design, and things like that. So this provides a great set of resources that we want to assignmentize within the Forge such that you can make it so that every student has their own version of the document that they are constructing in any of these technologies. That right there is requires some tweaking in order to be able to do. And the general infrastructure looks like this. And if this looks a little complicated to you, don't worry about it. It's not dealing with the practical applications in the classroom, but it's useful in order to see the bigger picture because you can also see the flexibility that's associated with the Forge. And the idea behind there is that you have a core technology. So let's just grab the writer technology, the word processor. That's wrapped around the Forge infrastructure. The student, not in this case here, the instructor, interacts directly with the Forge. And from the Forge, it can help to facilitate student management, individual editing of documents for every student who has their own individual document of it, facilitates peer review, revision control, analytics that I'll be discussing momentarily, and Raymond will go into a lot more detail, grading, learning management, integration, and such. Aaron mentioned this is a lot like Google Classroom. Actually, it is a lot like the way Google Classroom operates without the infrastructure, the baggage that comes with Google for doing that. With a handful of other more powerful things. In part, this can actually couple directly into the Adapt homework system, and all the grading that you are associated with this thing can actually fold into Adapt as a bridge to your learning management system. So each of the students all have individual access to these things, but we have a handful of other pedagogically useful capabilities that what you wouldn't get in the Google Classroom infrastructure. Yeah. And then, as I mentioned before, scores from the Forge can pass back to the learning management system via the Adapt homework system. This right here is a snapshot of what the Forge looks like when you actually go to it. As an instructor, Uh, and it has a handful of different things. There are some guides up here, depending upon if you're a student or an instructor, that just shows you what you'd experience. We have the classes on here and the courses off of here. I unfortunately don't have an infrastructure in order to hide FERPA protected data, so I can't go into my previous examples in my class, but Raymond has been doing this a lot longer than I have, so I presume that he's going to have a better job of explaining this real time. And depending upon how the time goes, I'm happy in order to jump into it in order to be able to discuss it in more detail. This right here shows the classes. I only have two classes going on right now. Actually, this technically ended a few weeks ago, and then I have a demo class that I use in order to be able to process that. Uh, Students enroll using an enrollment key, although it will funnel into Adapt very soon so that students just basically get access to all these components by making an assignment in Adapt, just like we did for any other type of assignment discussed yesterday. This right here is how I use Adapt in my chemistry class. Sorry, how I use Forge in my chemistry classroom. So I have multiple labs. And students basically craft their work on the labs, and then we can review them, and we have the facility, we have analytics in order to be able to help facilitate that. I've used it for extra credit or for any other long form assignment that I want to be able to put out there. I've used this also for a graduate level class for students in order to be able to create these things. And I can come in and edit these things with appropriate capabilities. This right here is an example of what it looks like from the instructor's perspective. The student's perspective is not terribly dissimilar, but they don't have a lot of this stuff on the side here in order to be able to facilitate and write these things. So ZZ Price asked, can students collaborate on specific assignments in group writing? Right now, it's not designed for that, but it will be soon. It is designed for peer review, which is one we'll be transitioning soon, so that you can actually assign students to be able to review other students' work, edit it, and provide feedback on the side in order to facilitate that. But I would expect that to be operational by the end of the summer. Just as a reminder, this is more than just a document. It can be used for spreadsheets, if that's a particular use for it. It can be used for presentations. This is actually not PowerPoint. This is the slide infrastructure showing a slide that I'm going to be showing in a couple slides from now. Off here. Um, just like with Google Docs and also with Word, we have the capabilities in order to provide feedback on the side, whether this is the instructor coming in here or a peer review infrastructure that you use in order to be able to help hone the construction process, and that gives us the ability to have more fine-tuned capabilities. And just as a reminder, this is a paperless approach for doing things. So there's never any printing out of papers and submitting it or any losing of papers, which happens from time to time off here. So I mentioned the commentary things, but one of the really beautiful things that the Forge provides is the opportunity in order to do more advanced analytics. So the concept off of this thing is at least I'm going to formulate it right now within the question is how do we coexist with AI? And many, if not all of us, have started to notice AI creeping into student submitted work. Uh, I see it in open-ended questions on Adapt. Certainly in the last year to year and a half, the students' writings has gotten a lot better, and oftentimes not exactly aligned with what I want it to be able to do. So how do we actually try to coexist with AI in a meaningful fashion? And we're still trying to figure that out, and there's certainly technologies out there in order to try to identify AI writing, which is actually not good enough in order to be able to use with too many false positives, too many false negatives. And the infrastructure that was that Raymond implemented here was to essentially focus on the process, not the product. Or at least in addition to the product. So the conventional way in which you'd be evaluating the essay or a lab report, in my case, is the student submits the lab report and we review it. If we have the process where every single time that the student is editing within a certain duration, whether it's 30 seconds or several minutes, we save a copy of that document. You can then provide a history of what they've been doing from the start of writing to the end when they actually submit. And that provides us access to actually look at the process, not just grade the final product. And that gives us also not just the ability to use that as a mechanism in order to identify if students are plagiarizing in some ways or copying and pasting from sources that they shouldn't be doing, but it provides us a mechanism in order to give better feedback to our students in terms of how to write and how to prepare what they're doing. Or if students come back and ask, how do you actually do stuff? We can actually give them feedback behind that. So one of there are a range of different analytical tools in order to be able to address this. And the one that's probably the most powerful is the essay map. And again, this is formulated around composition, hence the term, but the idea behind it is relatively simple. Like I said, we save multiple snapshots of the writing process from the time that it's initially started to the time that it actually submitted. And you can actually look at that time on the x-axis. Now, on the y-axis, if you actually look at where the editing is done in the document, you can identify how the student is writing. So this is an example of looking at if you were to just sit down and start typing without any revision, you'd expect to have a diagonal writing process because you're just writing straight through. However, if you go back and you start to modify and edit things, you'll start to spend time that's outside of this diagonal in this revision period. So you can use this as a mechanism to identify, are students actually revising? Are they going through and editing, or are they just basically copying and pasting? Or not copying and pasting, sorry, just writing straightforward that's out there. That's two immediate aspects that you get from the essay map. But two other ones that are particularly important is that it also tracks cutting and pasting of content on the Google Doc, or sorry, on the documents of the LibreDoc. So cutting is designated as a red and a circle, and pasting is designated as a green circle. So normally we, in the process of editing, of course, do lots of copying and pasting and moving things around, especially if we spend a lot of effort on the document that we put in together. But you can see the behavior of how they actually, if they were to copy and paste off it here. But what happens if you were to copy large quantities of stuff from a source that you shouldn't be copying it, like ChatGPT or some other AI source? So when you go through that, you have something like this, where this student is editing and then does massive pastes of content, editing massive pastes of content as it actually starts to evolve. And you'll see that nothing has been cut here. Just basically insert, insert, insert. So if you establish as the ethics of this project that they have to do all their composition onto the document, you can use this as an argument in order to come in and say you shouldn't. This is a violation. This is likely copying the stuff from some other source, most likely AI. Bob asked the question, "What is brown?" And I'm not entirely sure about that. Hopefully Raymond can chime in.
That's because the green and the red are overlapping. So
Okay, there we go. Um, um, so that probably means they copied and pasted, but they pasted directly in the same spot, if I had to guess. Um, so, um, so you can read this and you can say, well, the student doesn't deserve full credit for that, depending upon how your rubric's put together. This is an example of a good process, typing, going back and revising, a little copy and pasting in different spots, but you see that they are copy and pasting within the document, not outside the document and such. Another analytics tool is the heat map. And the idea behind the heat map is to get an absolute metric of the time that students are spending on their construction efforts and when they actually do so. And so it's basically arguing, here are some dates and here are times, and the student worked here, 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 here. So when the student comes in and says they've spent 20 hours working on the project and they deserve an A, you can at least review it and say, well, actually, technically you worked 20 minutes. And then you can decide how you want to use that information effectively, but it helps to give you details on how the students are working on the project. In other words, focusing on the project, the process, not the project. So I mentioned this before. the idea behind the open pedagogy aspect is that it was clear to us in the beginning when we started the ChemWiki is that to facilitate open pedagogy, that is, to make these assignments openly licensed and then moved out into the distribution sphere that we provide within the LibreText, it was important in order to go through multiple stages of development. It didn't require just construction. It needed to have peer review and revision and multiple steps in order to be able to do it. And we have a set of best practices in order to facilitate open pedagogy if people are interested off of that. So Forge is designed to have peer review in place, so you can actually select students randomly or assign them in order to be able to review other students' work, and then they can write their own review in order to do that. I use that using a scientific journal rubric, Jack's journal, if that means anything to you, and provides an opportunity in order to students to learn about reviews, do some critical evaluation, and then the student that's been writing then has feedback in order to be able to help augment and make a better product. And this has proved to be exceedingly important for improving the quality of the product that's actually generated, uh, at least from a not necessarily from a pedagogical perspective, although it does apply. There are theories behind the peer engagement theory specifically, but provides an opportunity in order to improve the quality that's out there. And there are a range of different benefits that you get from using this, including active learning, improved understanding, better communication skills between the two, constructive feedback, criticism, such like that. The peer review infrastructure is designed both with reviewers being open, meaning that you can know their name, or anonymized, which gives a better capability of reviewing without being concerned about the political consequences of that. There was a question that was in the chat by Jan. Okay, I think that's a question for Raymond. I'll let Raymond address that either in the chat or in his talk. So I mentioned open pedagogy workflow. The idea that we have that we will be using the Forge in order to help scale up and fill in the holes that OER has out there is to be able to mobilize students in order to be able to construct, review, revise, and construct, and go through this cycle that the Forge allows us to be able to do in an effective manner. That really there is no other technology out there that's designed in order to do these things. And our hopes and expectations is this is going to be exceedingly important in terms of addressing not just the quality, but the quantity of OER that's out there, especially for classes that have nothing available for that. With that, I will end this just by talking about a little bit of the future of what the Forge has. We're working on efforts in order to handle scaling effectively. Sustainability is certainly an important aspect, and it's one of the reasons why it's folded into the Libreverse that you guys have access to. Scaling it onto an infrastructure in order to be able to handle multiple people simultaneously editing. That's an infrastructure called Kubernetes, or at least one of the technologies is capable of doing that. And then we're interested in using this as a mechanism in order to facilitate research on open pedagogy and open construction efforts. So with that, I'm going to let you guys take a look through the Forge on your own. Again, you have access to it. Is relatively straightforward in how it applies. There's guidance both in Insight and also directly in the Forge in order to be able to move forward with that. And I'm certainly happy in order to address any issues. And Raymond will be able to talk a lot about how he's used them in his classes, and he's been using it a lot. So I'm happy to answer any questions and before I transition into Jupyter, which is going to be a shorter discussion. Joy asked, where is data stored? Do students need to purchase it with Adapt? It's a really good question. So data is stored in the same infrastructure as the Adapt homework infrastructure. So it's our system. It's protected by a variety of safeguards. We do anonymize students via universal user identification numbers instead of user names when we don't need them. So after the class is over, then we want them to be purged in the same way that we want them to be purged on Adapt. The second question is, do students need to purchase the Forge with that. Unfortunately, it does because the infrastructure behind it requires a bit of effort. Right now, we have a bundled deal. So if you're a LibreNet member, your campus is a LibreNet member, you can have access to the Forge, Jupyter, which I'll be talking about momentarily, and Adapt, all for $15 per 6 months per student.